Hey everyone, welcome to the Unhandled Exception podcast. I'm Dan Clark and this is episode number 27. And today I am super excited to be joined by Kendra Havens to geek out on Visual Studio. Welcome to the show, Kendra, and thank you so much for joining me.
Hey Dan, it's so good to be here.
So I should give you a proper formal introduction. And so Kendra is, I'm hoping I'm getting this right, a program manager on the .NET and Visual Studio team, focusing on .NET tooling and the testing experience in Visual Studio. And has done a ton of amazing videos on Visual Studio, .NET Core, C# and the testing tools as well. I hope I've got that right.
Yeah, that's me. That's all. Definitely, I should use that for a bio. That works perfectly. Yeah, I've been a program manager at Microsoft for 5 years, 2-time intern before that. Really enjoyed a lot of it. I've gotten to move around a little bit and learn a lot of parts of the .NET team. And yeah, most recently I've landed on the test experience in Visual Studio. So the Test Explorer rewrite that we did in 16.2, that was me and my team. Message me if you hate it. Yeah, it's been exciting. And yeah, all the test platforms, MS Test, the features in Visual Studio, like live unit testing or code coverage or all of that. So that's us.
I guess we should say message you if you love it as well, not just hate it.
Yeah, we even better. Yeah.
Maybe in a bit we can dive into what the everyday role of being a PM on the Visual Studio team looks like, because it's such a huge piece of software, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall on one of the daily stand-ups.
They're not interesting. They're awful. It's just everybody talking too long and oof, yeah, it's...
I think that's every company's stand-up on the planet,
yeah.
I think.
I'd love to corral them, and just like if everybody could get it down to like a minute, it would be so much better. But instead, like people start asking questions and it's like a mini team meeting. And I'm like, well, I don't need to know what branches you all are using, so I'm going to go.
So is this one Visual Studio stand-up, or is there lots of different teams that make up Visual Studio?
There's lots of different teams. Yeah, so my stand-up that that could be better is the unit testing stand-up for the test experience team. Yeah, I would go to the other dev team stand-up that I work with, but they are in Prague, so it's at like 3 a.m. or something. But maybe theirs is a little bit more succinct.
I've completely forgotten what time it is over there.
It's 9 a.m. here in Seattle.
9 a.m. So we're 10 past 5 at the moment. So before we delve into Visual Studio, this episode's listener mention, and this one goes to Tom, who is at Sealing Fish on Twitter. So I'm sure there's a story behind that Twitter handle somewhere. And he tweeted, "Many thanks, Chris Sainty. I've been meaning to try out Blazor for ages, and your talk on the Unhandled Exception podcast was the nudge I needed." And Tom's referring to episode 19, where Chris Sainty joined me to chat all about Blazor. And you are not on your own, Tim. Chris definitely sold it to me too. And I'm actually looking forward to Blazor Desktop, which actually I haven't tried it yet, but now I've installed Visual Studio 2022. Is this something I can play with now?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe Blazor Desktop. I should probably look up what exactly we put into preview. But yeah, I'm sure if you install the web workload, you'll have something to play with there.
Oh, nice. I installed the preview version last weekend, and I've been using that all this week. And I never thought to actually just try new project Blazor Desktop. In fact, I'm going to try it now, actually, right now, live. Well, maybe not live, but you know what I mean. Create new project.
Yeah, I wanted to Google and verify really quickly that yes, it's shipping with .NET 6, and since 6 is the what's supported in Visual Studio 2022, I believe that's how you want to get started.
I can't see it in the templates. I'll have a look later. I should have tried before we started the podcast, but never mind. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And there's so many things in .NET 6, like the hot reload.
Oh my gosh. Hot reload is absolutely amazing. Every time I use it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I thought development would be like, I guess. Not the F5ing, just kind of being an instant part of your... It's really, really cool. It's like edit and continue all the time.
Is it as fast as people say it is? So it's like pretty much immediate?
It is. It is absolutely, I think, as fast as people say it is. Like, obviously, we're all working with different machines and everything, and we need to make sure they're, like, reproducible every time before we make any... exaggerated claims or anything like that. But every time I use it, I'm like, Oh my gosh, I wish I was recording so we could do a perf blog post or something like that. We just, yeah, it's going to be really exciting. Actually, recently in the release notes, we also have Hot Reload in the Test Explorer is in like sort of an experimental preview. And this is exactly the idea of Hot Reload, essentially. We won't rebuild a test necessarily if we don't need to between test runs. So if you don't have any of the root edits that disqualify it from hot reload, that does require and trigger like a full rebuild. So it can be super fast. So we actually realized in the Test Explorer we have a problem because now people can't tell if the test run completed and it was just really fast or if that's like an old test result, and or if it's like, so we needed to, well, we still need to rethink how we communicate what is a new test result and what isn't, which has been a really interesting, wonderful problem to have, that it's too fast to differentiate.
So it's too fast, so task.delay, await task.delay.
Yeah, just start adding that to your no.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. So before we carry on, I just want to quickly address kind of like the elephant in the room, in the fact that, and this is to avoid me getting lots of messages from listeners that know that I'm currently a Rider user, because this has come up in quite a few past episodes. But what listeners probably don't know is that I've actually been using Visual Studio for a very, very long time, and pretty much since my first programming job in 1998, which was all C++, and long before I started .NET. And looking back on Wikipedia, it looks like Visual Studio was like 1 year old at that point. It's certainly come a long, long way. And as I said before, last weekend I installed 2022, which was very exciting, the preview version. And especially when I start creating new projects and seeing the words .NET 6 in my CS project files. And it's not that long away, is it, before .NET 6 gets released, go live? I think it's a month away.
Not at all. Yeah, November 8th, I believe. Sorry. That's probably, so the Visual Studio launch is like just before .NET Conf, so that all of those dates are when I need to be ready by. But yes, it's early November.
So what's it like in the Microsoft Teams at the moment with all this?
It's not hectic at all. We plan perfectly. Don't worry about it.
You're saying those words very carefully, though.
No, it's definitely a crunch time. Just, yeah, trying to figure out, people have really high expectations for GA versions and quality and stuff. So lots and lots of bug fixes are going in that people have been awesome enough to report during the previews. And yeah, I'm excited about how much adoption we've seen on .NET 6 already. I think it's much more hardened, I guess. I think we have a lot of people very interested in features like Hot Reload and Blazor Desktop and those things. And people are really excited to kind of try out early versions of whatever is getting out there. So that just makes the product better, when more people use the preview. So very excited about that.
And was it Maui that's been delayed slightly? I think it's Maui, isn't it?
I believe so. I should look up what our official wording is. I don't work as closely on any of that. But yes, I believe we've been in some talks.
I read the blog post, and I can link to that in the show notes. But I think that's really good because there's so many companies I've worked for in the past where things aren't quite ready, but then marketing and management have just said, well, tough, this is the deadline, this is the go live date. And it must have been such a hard decision, but it definitely sounds like the right decision because it's a new thing. Well, it's the new name for Xamarin, but then you've got other stuff like the cross-platform desktop stuff. So there's so much more in Maui. And to put it off and make it right from the start, I think that's definitely a good decision. So for the listeners that don't know what's new in .NET 6 and Visual Studio specifically, what's new in Visual Studio 2022?
Oh gosh, I'm so excited about it. Well, the biggest thing ever, 64-bit, obviously. It is the 64-bit release of Visual Studio. We're no longer bound to the 32-bit process. We're fantastically excited. Oh, so I was just talking about how fast Hot Reload is, but that's not super fair because we also, there's also just more available. So I think there's a lot of performance improvements in a lot of different areas. We've been moving lots of things out of proc to kind of go along with this work. And we've also been able to make performance improvements and just use less memory in general. So something I probably don't talk enough about is things like the Test Explorer. Just discovery uses 60% less memory than it used to. And those are just, without 64-bit, without any hot reload kind of for the performance improvements that you're going to see are going to be coming from a lot of different places that were a bit like allowed to happen because we got a chance to think about our architecture in a different way. So massive performance improvements can kind of be expected. I'm very excited to watch the, out of memory exceptions count go down for what we can track in telemetry, at least for those who have it turned on, or just we can see a lot more telemetry for like internal Microsoft folks, which, could be, several tens of thousands of people, which is a pretty good data set to figure out how something is performing. So we try to get people internally on the latest previews so we can kind of test it really, really well in a lot of scenarios. And I'm really excited to kind of see the results. I hope we have more performance blog posts. I know Kanika is our kind of performance PM, and I know she's working on more. So that'll be cool to see.
Fantastic. So all the graphs and comparisons will be blogged about, will they?
I think, yes, I think we have a few side-by-side comparisons and a few tables as well for kind of comparing times for certain operations. I think big things that we're focusing on are different searches, so find in files or find all references, and solution load as well. That's always a really big one. Test discovery is also a big one. We did more work, as I said earlier, in the Visual Studio 2019 life cycle as well. So you saw a little bit of those earlier. Yeah, so performance, 64-bit, hot reload is very exciting. So do your viewers, have they heard of hot reload? What the idea is?
I don't know, actually. I guess we've got quite a wide range of listeners. So,
okay. I didn't want to be talking about it and how cool it was without explaining.
Well, it's probably worth starting at the beginning and assuming that the listeners haven't heard of it. And
I like it.
Yeah.
So hot reload, for those who haven't heard of it, is the idea of not needing to do a complete build in between, I guess, compiling and showing results in your Visual Studio Editor. So it's very much like edit and continue when you're debugging. So it can kind of compile like a small part of code and just insert it back into what you're looking at, the binaries that you're debugging through. And this idea can be applied outside of debug mode, which is very exciting. So as I said, when you're running a test, you may not necessarily need to rebuild everything so there's certain edits that we can just, understand what they are and insert them without rebuilding entirely. And you can start, getting results and massively reduce any kind of build time. So the build almost looks, like suspiciously quick. So we're still, kind of working through how to confirm that, yes, a hot reload build did happen in build in quotation marks, I should say. You were hot reloaded, I guess. And yeah, you can continue and trust the code that you have and just keep developing without having to wait.
And this includes refreshing the browser as well. So are you pretty much doing Control S, or do you even have to save and then it's updating?
You don't even have to save.
You don't have to save. Wow.
It's wild. Yeah.
So you're changing like C#, CSS, JavaScript, or maybe not JavaScript with Blazor, but then as you're typing, it's refreshing. It's just there.
I'm not sure all of the languages we support, but I was really impressed with how many different project types that we support. So unit test projects and like Maui projects and Blazor and WebAssembly. And I was like, how do we already support like Xamarin workloads with this? It just came out, but it was very much kind of built on the edit and continue technology, which we already, supported all of the WinForms and all of the project types that we use. So pretty good spread.
Yeah, because I do think it's underestimated. Well, I don't think it is nowadays, but how easy it is to get distracted, even if like you make a change and you've got to compile and then out a 5 or whatever, maybe a 15-second cycle between changing the code and actually seeing the results. That's enough to get you out of the zone. And just having that immediate as you're coding, maybe on a second monitor, just seeing it change as you're coding. There's been like all the studies and everything, and so if someone gets interrupted, is it like 15 minutes or something to get back to exactly as they were, or something silly, for the mind to focus back and get back into the zone again. So anything we can do to reduce any interruptions and improve that developer cycle just sounds incredible.
Absolutely. We're very excited about it. Gosh, there's so much to talk about, actually. So I'm like building out like my 60-minute talks and stuff that will be given, in November after the big release. But it's a lot to cover, honestly. All of the productivity and Roslyn improvements that I'm really excited about that Mika Dumont and the Roslyn team works on are going to be really cool. So just quick fixes to get all of your projects into file scope namespaces to kind of just seeing all of the white space like just immediately that left indent and getting that tab room back. It's weird what excites us, but there you go. It's file scope namespaces are going to be really nice. Just shifting all of your code left and kind of getting rid of yet some of the curly braces. We're doing our best.
I think that's it with the next version of C# with the you're mentioning about the file scope namespaces.
Mm-hmm.
That is literally indentation. But that's probably one of the features I'm looking most forward to because I'm a big fan of really succinct code. So I hate extra stuff that's not needed. And to be able to just get rid of that indentation and really make it as small as possible, I'm quite looking forward to the whole minimal API. I've not actually played with it, but I keep on seeing things on Twitter with like code snippets are getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Absolutely. The code that cuts itself. Sorry, we were talking about code snippets the other day and what we can improve there. Yeah, I'm really excited about a lot of the cool stuff coming up.
I think it's control period, isn't it? The shortcut to do those, so you can just. I'm trying to avoid doing rider references because I normally use L10 to sort of.
Actually, Alt Enter, I think we mapped that one as well, so both will work and do the same thing. I should double check it, but oh yeah, I have Visual Studio open. Yeah, so we also have ReSharper keyboard shortcuts for anyone who needs them and need that installed in Visual Studio. Let's see, so Alt Enter. Yep, that works with the default. Cool. Yeah, so Alt Enter or Control Dot, whatever you want to use. Oh yeah, you're a big keyboard shortcuts person, right?
Yes, I absolutely love, basically I try and stop myself from having to take my hand off the keyboard and reach for the mouse. So with me using Visual Studio Preview all this week, I suppose the only pain point I've hit really is just relearning different keyboard shortcuts. I've got a really bad memory in general, but for keyboard shortcuts, I seem to I've got a weird memory in the sense of once I see a keyboard shortcut, I just remember it. And everything else, I've got an awful memory. I just forget names and everything. But with keyboard shortcuts, it just seems to stick in my head. So it wasn't that much of a pain point. I just looked at what the new hotkey was, and then I was fine. So just getting used to like you're talking about the test explorer and stuff. Like I think it's like Control RA for run all or RL for run last, and just getting used to these ones. But that was the only. I don't want to say pain point. That was kind of like everything else. I could just use the preview version of Visual Studio 2022, and I've been using that all week.
Yeah. Did you use that? Now, I actually don't know if the ReSharper keyboard mapping is very much like the writer shortcuts, but we do have a ReSharper keyboard mapping. For Visual Studio, did you use that?
So when I'm using Rider and I choose the keyboard scheme, I actually choose Visual Studio.
Oh, okay. I don't know what. Yeah.
So I've got the opposite, but I think so.
Okay. So any differences or not okay. Cool.
Well, I know with Visual Studio, well, with ReSharper in Visual Studio, you've got the Control T, which brings up the everything pop up. And then in Rider, it's just Shift. And then in Visual Studio without ReSharper, which is what I've been using this week, it seems to be at the top in the title bar, there's like a search everything. I think it's Control Q, which so rather than being a pop-up like ReSharper does, it's just an always there search at the very top. And I found I could do Control Q and then type in whatever I wanted to search for. And it just found it very quickly.
Yes, I'm so happy we have global search. It's super nice. I've been like shouting about Control Q for years because I think we figured out at least like less than 10% of people were using it regularly, and we were like, but this is supposed to be the main entry point. Like, so we've added code search to that as well. So everything you get in Control T, like for searching symbols, files, and all of that, you can also get in Control Q now as well, which is kind of cool. You can still type like what is like an M for searching members, that kind of thing.
I think in general, like you're saying, not many people seem to use it. With keyboard shortcuts in general, when I'm pairing with other developers, I quite often see the mouse used way too much and just manual slow actions where actually a quick keyboard combo would have done it in a second, and they're just spending ages and ages. And so I just think, like, as you say, Control Q for everything you want to do if you want to find something. Out of interest, do settings appear in there as well?
Yes, in Control Q they do. So it actually indexes all of the settings need to be tagged with the right keywords that you're actually searching for. So we don't like just use all of the words in the settings. We ask teams to tag them appropriately, and it indexes all of the menus in Visual Studio. So at first Control Q kind of started as like the visual, like the IDE type of search, and then we added code search to it as well.
Oh, nice. I'm going to just load it up. So I've just done Control Q show white spaces. So thinking of a setting, and it's taken me straight to that setting, so I can set it. So from a discovery point of view as well, just if there's something you want to set, don't go manually searching through all the settings. Just Control Q.
Yeah. It's funny you say discovery. You can only discover things through Control Q if you already know that they exist and what keywords you're looking for. So I think you said these listeners are advanced listeners and they're already devs and they kind of know like, oh yeah, I'm looking for my white space settings and code formatting and editor config settings or something like that. We still have all of the UI, and that's how people kind of like explore manually and learn. But yeah, definitely with advanced developers, people move from using the UI to searches and keyboard shortcuts to, yeah, keep their fingers on their keys. And it definitely speeds up, using the IDE. I do have a new one you might really like. In Visual Studio 2022, we're adding Show in Test Explorer. So it's sort of like sync with Active Document and Solution Explorer, if you've used that. So that one, whatever document you're typing in, it'll jump you to and highlight where it is in the Solution Explorer so you know what file you're working in. Same thing with the Test Explorer. So if you're typing in a test in the editor, I think what keyboard shortcut did we decide? I'd have to look it up again, but it'll jump to the test in the Test Explorer and it like expand all of the nodes and everything. It was a super highly requested keyboard shortcut because it's also like a brand new navigation feature as well that like lets you kind of toggle in between the editor and the Test Explorer, which is cool.
Ah, brilliant. Yeah, anything that stopped me from having to reach for the mouse is all good.
Yeah, that's the idea for sure. So that's one of the ones that I'm excited about it since we're talking about keyboard shortcuts.
So a few episodes ago, I was joined by Jesse Liberty and James World for an episode on Git, the source control thing. So I must admit, I've always used an external GUI rather than one inbuilt into an IDE, whether it's be Visual Studio or Rider. I've always just used I actually use SmartGit. So I haven't really experienced how Git VS integration has changed over the years. But I've heard recently that a lot of work has gone into the Git integration in Visual Studio. Actually, on that Git episode, Jesse did say that the difference is like night and day and dramatically improved. So it sounds like this has been like quite a big focus for the Visual Studio team.
Yeah, that's so good to hear. Yeah. I do really like it. I don't trust it for all Git scenarios. I'm very also Git sort of command line. I've used Git Bash. I did originally try using like things like, what did I use back in the day? Source tree or the Git GUI and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's Git is such a interesting, complicated thing for a human to think through. I don't think we think in these terms of, resetting and thinking about branches and merging and all of that. And what is remote? Am I remote? Who's local? Yeah. But I do think there are a lot of perks in the Git changes window or Git windows in Visual Studio now. They're definitely a huge improvement from what they used to be. And little things are very nice, like being able to, pop changes onto a different branch with just new clicks, because I always forget to like start a new branch before I start making changes, and then I can pop them and stash it and all of that. With just like 3 clicks, that's been very, very nice. But another thing I really like is it's one click like initialize a Git repository, and you don't even need to think about, and it'll add like Git ignores and stuff now, which we never had. I couldn't believe we never had any item templates for like default Git ignores that you need in like a .NET project. Like, why didn't we have that? So now we do, which is very nice.
You've surprised me now. I'm sure when I've created a new project in Visual Studio before that it's had a checkbox saying like, add Git or something. I'm curious. I'm going to have to try it now. Visual Studio 2019. Let's load that up.
I work with like 10 different versions of things before they ship. So I'm so sorry if I'm getting any of this wrong.
Well, I said before that about my memory, so it's probably me that's wrong.
So I don't, well, but I'm using the new version. So I don't remember if I ever saw it before, but now I do have like create a Git repository and I can choose. So it also can create it just directly from my, like associated with my GitHub account. So it sets up a remote URL like naturally. So I can create and push, and if, as long as my GitHub account, like I'm logged in to my GitHub account in, Visual Studio, it'll say like, oh, you're creating a new repository, and the default is private, which is really nice. So it'll, by default, it can create like a private repository on GitHub, which is really lovely. Like, especially if it's just a personal project that I'm just kind of working in, I might like not push it to anything, and then if I lose that directory because I'm doing a lot of stuff to get a demo working or something like that, I might lose a little bit of work because I don't push as often. But since it's all set up like automatically and private in my GitHub repo, I can just kind of store whatever I need to, which is really nice.
That is pretty cool. Presumably it supports both GitHub and Azure DevOps repos as well.
Oh, I believe so. I should have. I just created one. I should go back and check. But yeah, I believe it does. Yeah.
But you were totally right. I've just loaded up 2019 and created a new project, and it didn't ask me about a Git ignore. So you're right. So it was my memory. So that's pretty cool that that's in there. Although I've never noticed that it didn't do it in the first place.
Maybe it's done that for a while. I don't know. Like after a while working in these tools and the combinations of like extensions or whatever that you used over the years to get it right, yeah, it all kind of fades. But that's the best kind of improvement. Things like you don't really know, but your life feels better, and you're not really sure what it is. That's what it's a good one.
Very cool. Speaking of Git, I believe in 2022 you've got multi-repo support as well.
Yes, we have multi-repo support in Git now and with Visual Studio, which is very cool. So that started in Visual Studio 2022 Preview 3. We have a blog post on it that Taser wrote. I do know that it was really, really highly requested. It was one of those things that were on the top of our backlog for a while that we were just trying to get into. So pretty exciting.
I saw it, but then I realised that I'm thinking back and I can't think of any projects which I've got that have spanned multiple repos. But I guess the only time I probably would have that is if I'm temporarily... So if I've got a project like a web app or a desktop app, and then I've got a private NuGet package, a custom NuGet package in another project, which is in another Git repo. Sometimes I might change that package reference to a project reference, just so I can put it in the same solution temporarily so I can debug through. So, and then in that case, if I'm making changes across both, then yeah, it probably would be quite useful in that case, even though I'm only temporarily adding that second project to it. That would be quite useful.
Yeah, and like just speaking of multi-repo support and just the Git experience in general, exploring just branches and now multiple repositories and local and remote history is all. The Git history window is really advanced. I'm always really surprised how much data it can kind of pull and put my branch and everything that I have sort of in context. Yeah, so now being able to also browse across repos is very, very cool.
How's the performance on that? Is that one of the areas you've been focusing on?
I believe so. I mean, it's one of those new things. So I think once we see it in the wild, we'll know a little bit more about how the performance is doing. I definitely haven't had any problem, but I haven't worked in repos with, 4 million lines of code. I should see how Roslyn does, or, the .NET runtime libraries or something like that. And yeah, see how they do. Really, really stress test it. I'm sure Taser would know, but...
Isn't it Windows that needed to add I can't remember what the name is now, something with Git to large file system support or something. There's something where, because the Windows code base is that big, so I think they had to do something custom for that. But yeah, that'd probably be a good test, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we probably only pull the files that you're browsing to, and that's all quite quick. So seeing all the commits is much less data, and we're not pulling like the entire file until you actually try to open it. So it's not like we've, cloned all the entire world onto your machine or anything. It's really just kind of a navigation and what are the top level things and what do you actually want to dig into, and smartly pulling just like a subset of that.
Very cool. So just think about other features in Visual Studio. So I guess a lot of us are now working remotely. So remote collaboration is quite important. And obviously it's not that new anymore with the live share support. Is that ongoingly being worked on, or is that kind of like now a fixed, a working product?
Absolutely. We're definitely super invested in LiveShare. That same team is working on like the VS Code code spaces experience, which is fire, which is absolutely lovely. So no, I do really think the next step in sort of team collaboration is having that like shared workspace that you all can just hop on the same sort of environments and share actually like the Docker files of what your dev environment is. So you never ever have any dependency issues because you're all working inside of containers and you have that shared context wherever you are. And then you can hop on calls and they have live chats already in VS Code, which is very, very cool. I'm really excited for the chats and the calls to come to Visual Studio. I'm not sure when that is or anything, but it's definitely a part of the game plan. So yeah, very excited about collaboration and sharing code and everything.
Obviously, when lockdown started, I, like everyone, started working from home. But luckily, I'm in a position where I can stay working from home now. And I don't think I ever want to go back. It's kind of, technology has made it so easy to work remotely. And I've got quite a good setup now. So, and no commute. My longest commute was an hour and a half each way.
Wow.
I worked on the other side of Reading. And so if you think about that, that's 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week, 2 working days just driving. And it's kind of...
Yeah.
scary.
I don't know why we ever did it. And it's so bad for the environment. Like, what are we doing? Yeah. I think, a lot of people are right there with you, a lot of the team and everything. We were already a hybrid team, actually. We already had my unit testing stand up always calls in to our devs in South Carolina. I mentioned we had a Prague team. So yeah, we've been thinking about remote work for a really long time and just making sure it's, accessible and inclusive of everyone. Some interesting challenges there, but also a lot of opportunity. And I know I've definitely loved the idea of just, my commute being 2 minutes walking from, not 2 minutes, less than a minute walking from wherever I am to my desk. That's been pretty lovely. So
I was going to say, how big is your house if it takes 2 minutes to get to
I know, I live in like a mansion. No, I live in an apartment, so that's not that's not what it is. But I mean, 2 minutes to turn on my camera and check my hair and make sure I look professional, even though I just rolled out of bed. That's what the real 2 minutes is devoted to.
Oh, I think I mentioned this in another episode, but when there was one time when I was in a Teams meeting when there's quite a few people in, and you can probably see my webcam's positioned on top of my monitor, and I sat down and my foot just accidentally kicked the cable behind, and it flipped the webcam right down the back onto the floor behind my desk, and I was wearing like just shorts and but like a more appropriate top, but like the entire, like, everyone in the meeting got like an upshot, so it's kind of luckily someone was sharing the screen, so it was quite small, like thumbnail, but unluckily it was recorded. But oh well, one of those things.
Oh well, yeah. Oh, that's too bad. Oh no. I'm trying to remember any mishaps that we've had. I think I might have told my testing team that I loved them when I just I love you, when I was saying goodbye to my partner who was leaving for work. That might have been interesting. I thought I was muted, but I don't think I was. It's good. They need that. That's fine.
That's quite positive. It could have been worse.
Yeah.
So what big challenges have you faced? Because obviously you've got like the big .NET Conf thing next month and Visual Studio release, .NET release. But in general, like, what kind of big challenges have you faced as part of ongoing developing Visual Studio?
I'm so glad you asked this question. Let me tell you what I've been struggling with the past few days now. So it feels like every 3 years or so, we just rewrite something that maybe didn't need to be rewritten, and it's driving me nuts. So this is more of a problem. I think externally you don't see it as much, but internally at Microsoft, actually, I'll just use IntelliTest as an example. We have multiple fuzz testers that we've created at Microsoft. We have at least 4. One of them is a fuzz service, so you might say it doesn't count. It's like one fuzz technology. We just don't talk to each other enough, and it feels like we need to do more of that. So IntelliTest was originally like an MSR research project and very, very cool. So it generates tests. It's a fuzz tester. It generates multiple inputs that could go in a certain test, uses max and min values, uses a range of those selected inputs, and it's a test suite off of possible values. And it's really great. It looks for like divides by zero exceptions and null exceptions and all of that. Great technology. It has a lot that could be improved, though. We still haven't released .NET Core support. We are working on it. I'm not sure when we're going to release it. It is a massively upvoted ticket, but we're working on it and everything. But as we're doing that, MSR comes back to me with another test generation kind of effort. And then I talk to Windows or Office and I learn, oh no, they've created their own fuzz testing engines. And I'm like, guys, why don't we all work together on this? We're all in the same company. So I don't know. So it all makes me, oh gosh, I just see this in a dozen places that I can't quite talk about externally yet. Ask me in 20 years and I'm sure no one will care by then and I'll tell everyone about it. But I don't know, now that I've been on the inside for 5 years, I'm seeing a lot of patterns that are just driving me nuts on tooling things, on so I feel like all of our collaboration would be much better. I do feel like open source is one of the solutions for this. Like if people knew things existed, it'd be good, and we'd be more incentivized to work together rather than starting from scratch every time and just looking at a project that's 80% of the way there and saying, let's start over. That's been the particular thing that's been a chip on my shoulder, I think. But that's also a particular thing that PMs need to address in their job. A lot of our job is kind of holding the narrative and carrying it forward and making sure people have context on a solution. Oh my gosh, code coverage. So we're now supporting, so we have this huge sort of quality push internally. These happen regularly and everything. We say, hey, we should write more tests and have more validation before we check in PRs because we can catch bugs sooner and life will be better. There are so many internal solutions for code coverage right now. We are supporting 3, I believe. And it's just because, 7 years ago, someone decided to fork some internal tool and it's just driving me nuts. We can't support different solutions for Windows and Office and Exchange and 365 and like all of these different teams and Azure. Oh my gosh. I think sometimes people get the impression that Microsoft looks great from the outside, but once you get internally, you realize they have a lot of the same problems. It's just, the miracle of our release teams and our marketing teams and stuff that make it look like we have everything together. But yeah, I'm ready to stop having a lot of smart people do the same things over and over again and all work on the same thing, like combining our efforts and collaborating and having context. And when you start on a project, assume that someone else has done it before is probably my biggest thing. I feel like I'm in long rant mode, so sorry about that, but I think we're all, especially in software, we're all just working in a lot of silos right now, and a lot of this just human effort could be consolidated and we would go much, much further if we did. So I think this turned into an open source rant to decrease duplication of work. But I think that is honestly the biggest thing that I've been seeing across Visual Studio, less across .NET, because I think, with platforms are an interesting exception, I think, and how they do things and how we go after performance and security and all of the different things that make up a different language and different libraries. But with tools though, we should be able to use a lot of the same things. So, end rant.
I'm glad I asked that question now, although am I allowed to include all that in the podcast?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess what you did mention that Microsoft being one company, when actually it's so big, it may as well be multiple companies.
Yeah.
And I see the problems you're describing, I see in much, much smaller companies. I think what's the average size of a sprint team? They say about 5 to 7 or something. And then those are silos. And that's a good thing because that's the efficient way of working. But it's important that each of those silos communicates well. And it's just most of the time doesn't happen, and it's quite a difficult problem to solve. And yes, it isn't just Microsoft. I think it's an industry-wide problem.
It's everyone. Yeah, definitely. I can't believe how much effort has gone into software over the decades that was probably lost because just of turnover rate. New people came on the team, or they didn't fully understand, or management decided it was a lost cause when it was just 10% left of the way there, and how many things we've needed to build over. And granted, a lot of technology obviously has changed over those decades, and maybe we need to start afresh constantly to kind of keep up with that change. But to a certain degree, we definitely didn't. for what I've seen so far. And I feel like I haven't even been here that long. I'm wondering what more I'll be able to observe in this time. Hopefully deduplicate some of it. So we'll give it a shot.
Whilst technology is changing a lot, so you've got like web forms, MVC, then Blazor and all this kind of stuff. As long as code's been written with good separation, so the business logic is like separate, then .NET hasn't, even though the latest versions of C#, there's lots of new language features, it's very, very backwards compatible, even going back to the .NET framework. So your actual business logic, as long as it's not intertwined with your UI, if you've made it maintainable in the first place, you shouldn't have to do all these big, massive rewrites, especially not the business logic. But then it's kind of, I think one thing is that developers love new and shiny, and they love to write new things rather than maintain code. So it's kind of, I think that's probably the default for lots of developers. It's like, oh, this is old tech. I don't quite understand it. Let's rewrite it.
Absolutely.
As you say, that's kind of a lot of wastage.
That's what we do. And it's so difficult to know when it's the right thing to do and when it's not, because you don't want to be bogged down by the mistakes of the past, for sure. But there's some things that are absolutely amazing. Like there's internally, we built a different Test Explorer. The Windows team built their own Test Explorer because the Test Explorer in Visual Studio didn't do what they needed it to do. This was like 8 years ago. And they added all of this awesome stuff, a lot of stuff that we now have today, because we talked to them. And I interviewed the team and I was like, this is amazing. Can we just use this externally and put this in Visual Studio and get it, accessible to external developers? And there were reasons that we couldn't, for sure, but I was able to learn from a ton of their design UI. And actually, one of the features in Visual Studio 2022, remote testing, the idea of connecting your Test Explorer to an external environment, they had for years before before we actually released it. So remote testing can connect to a remote environment like a Linux container, WSL, or over SSH. They particularly needed to run tests over SSH because they need to run tests on different VMs that had different operating systems installed. So they, because they're Windows, they've been highly invested in that scenario for years. And oh my gosh, could you imagine how many people could have used that externally of Microsoft for the past 7 years or whatever? So they had a hierarchy long before our Test Explorer did. It was just, it's great that people made improvements at all. I rather it exists than not. It was the TAFE team and the TAFE framework. It's a fantastic framework, which actually now people can use externally. You can use the framework, but the whole Test Explorer that they created was just a internal tool. And now they're looking to move to our Test Explorer because we've added a lot of the features that they love, and we fixed some performance issues that they've always had in the background. But it's just one of those examples, and there's dozens and dozens that you see of like, wow, we really could have used this and more people could have benefited sooner. So that's what we're after right now.
With the I think I've heard of it. Well, you mentioned about the IntelliTest, but I've not played with it. So actually, I'd completely forgotten about it. So
I know.
So is that the same as PEX, almost that kind of thing?
It is PEX. It is the wrapper of PEX. It uses that whole framework. Yeah, it only works for .NET Framework right now, so we got to dust it off a little bit. We got to get it up to .NET Core, but we are working on it. It's been a super high ask for some years now.
So does that include it doesn't work with .NET standard class libraries either?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I will watch this space.
We'll get there. Yes, it's like on my backlog. I think it's the second most highly voted on the backlog. The most highly voted is probably bringing something from enterprise down into professional or community. Just give everything away for free. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm trying. I ask every year at least.
You got to try.
Yeah, we got to try.
Taking the word IntelliTest and changing it a bit and changing the enter code, IntelliCode.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing when playing with, I don't know whether this is part of IntelliCode actually, but playing with Visual Studio Preview as I was typing code, suddenly I would get like grey code like filling in the whole line for me. And I could press tab and complete.
Yeah. That is IntelliCode. That is IntelliCode whole line completions. There's kind of two features there which might be at work. We also have argument completion in Roslyn, which it's not as smart as IntelliCode. It's not using any AI, but it is scanning like your local context and the overloads that you are most likely to choose in that area and filling them in with like that ghost grayed out text and filling out the whole line. And yeah, hitting tab will accept that completion. You have to have IntelliCode turned on, I think. You have to have a few of the IntelliCode things checked on to get that, but it's very cool.
Ooh. I don't think I turned anything on explicitly. I just started using it.
Ooh.
And maybe it's in the preview, or maybe I've not got it fully turned on then. Have I got features that I don't know about? Let me do, right, going back to this control Q, I'm going to do that. I'm pressing.
For anyone who's not getting IntelliCode whole line completions, there is a setting that you can turn on in tools options. Maybe we have it on by default in the 2022 previews now. That could be it.
Oh, I've got something saying enable all IntelliCode preview features requires restart. So I'm going to click on that. This is from the control Q drop down. So let's click on that and see what happens. Oh, no, I've got the settings window. I've got a long list of preview features, which a lot of them aren't ticked. So this is enable. Oh, right, okay. So enable all IntelliCode preview features is unchecked. So the grey line completion
You're
isn't
getting
actually
it
the full
anyway.
thing. So the IntelliCode preview features are provided to you on blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm going to click that just so I don't forget. I'll play with that later.
It very well could have been argument completion that's on by default. I would need to check, but argument completion, again, does almost the same thing, just without using the AI smarts that IntelliCode does, because it's AI that we run over GitHub, so thousands and thousands of repos that we then learn common code patterns, and that's what whole line like is inserted into your code. So we can do a lot more, like that's what orders the IntelliSense list, and they can look at like common just coding behaviors that you're actually taking. So like repeated edits is a really cool feature. So yeah, it can do quite a few things, and it's kind of bringing AI into your daily flow, which is pretty cool.
I can't believe all this week I've been thinking I've been experiencing IntelliCode and I didn't even have it turned on.
That does sound like IntelliCode though, so I'll have to... You haven't had any stars in your IntelliSense list?
Yeah.
You have? So something had to be on. Maybe some things are...
It sounds like maybe I had half of it, but not maybe these super new preview features or something. But I've ticked it now, so next week I can experience the preview features, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, that sounds great. I don't know what state our settings are in. Sorry about that. I'm just very confused.
There must be so much to remember with all this stuff.
Well, that's true. That's my job, though. I gotta kind of look all of this up, but very cool, yeah.
So you're both on the Visual Studio and .NET. Are you working across the two teams?
Yeah, I work specifically on .NET tools in Visual Studio. So for a couple years there, I was working all on productivity in Roslyn, and then I got put on the Test Explorer, and Mika does productivity now, and we do talks together a lot. So I'm still fairly well versed in what they're checking in. Just a lot of cool things. If you want a list of more things, I have more things we can talk about. I love like removed unused references. That's a really big one. Sync namespaces, value tracking, inheritance margin. There's a lot of cool stuff coming out.
Yeah, definitely. As you said before, I'm a big keyboard shortcut fan, so the whole just being able to like control period and let code write itself. Like even things like when doing .NET code, like obviously nowadays .NET you do a lot of dependency injection. So that typically tends to be constructor injection. So just better hit a shortcut, create a constructor, insert the interface, but then automatically create the backing field and then just carry on coding. Just little things like that just save so much time.
I think pull member up was a big one in that area that we got a little bit more recently. Or like, what is it? Oh, extract to base. we also have that as well. So kind of extracting base classes for, yeah, there's some common, yeah, love that team. I love all of the little things that they check in. There's always like a huge list, and Mika and I are usually like, how are we gonna fit like those 50 things and source generators and editor config and like date time and time span completion? Like it's a lot for sure.
Well, I do have a few more suggestions, but maybe I can send you,
Ooh.
or we could say them now if you wanted. I think, okay, so one of the big ones, I think, which would be a big improvement in productivity, which it doesn't seem to do, is, do you know when you've got IntelliSense and then you get the drop down? It doesn't, and I could be wrong, it doesn't seem to show items that, or potential items that you would have got if there wasn't a missing using statement at the top. So quite often my flow would be like, maybe you're adding a NuGet package, and then for argument's sake, let's call it Dapper. Let's say you're adding Dapper, and then in your code you're doing whatever dot x. You're starting typing execute async, but you've not got the using statement. In Visual Studio, you've got to type out the full execute async. You've got to know what the method's called, and then press Control period to add the using. Where in, I hate to mention other IDs, but like,
No, that's okay. Yeah.
in Rider, as you're typing, IntelliSense is also including items when you've got missing using statements, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. We actually have dabbled a lot in that area to try to improve exactly this workflow that you're talking about. So in the case where you already have the reference in your package, but you don't have the using statement, we will scan through all of the types in that reference and try to, so this is completion for unimported types. That is available.
Ooh, maybe this is another preview thing then that I've not enabled.
We added it a while back, but it's totally possible that it's just like it doesn't provide completion within the characters that you'd expect it to. So maybe it is a bit delayed, but I want to check really quick and see if there is still a checkbox for it that you need. I didn't think you. Well, let's check.
I'm just going to quickly check that what I'm saying is true by adding Dapper to a new project. I'm fairly sure it wasn't, because it did seem to be quite a big pain point this week when I was using it, because it was kind of, I had to then go to the documentation to find out what the function is I wanted to call, where normally I would get the IntelliSense.
Sure, yeah. So this is completion for unimported types, and we added that ages ago. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
But oh gosh, it is still a checkbox. Sorry. So it's in Tools Options, C#, IntelliSense, and it's the second from the bottom, show items from unimported namespaces. That should, maybe we should get that on by default. I do have it checked by default, but I demo this all the time, so I'm not sure what the default state is. Can I send you pictures in this?
No, I don't think this is quite, it's not like Zoom, it's quite limited, unfortunately. That's a cool one if you can turn it on then.
I'm so sorry if you've been experiencing that by default. That doesn't make, So the setting is in the C# text editor under IntelliSense, and it's one of the checkboxes at the bottom.
C# text editor, IntelliSense. Right, so it's kind of, it's almost like a 3-stage checkbox, and it's a black square. So it looks like it's half on, but not fully on. So if I change that to be a full tick, I don't know what the in-between state is that it was currently on. So I've ticked that now, so I will play around with that offline. But yeah, that's brilliant that that's there.
Great, yeah.
It sounds like it would be definitely one I would suggest that's made a default, because all this week that's kind of a bit that was like, I suppose that's my only really frustrating bit that I hit, because I had to go back to the documentation and find out what the full method was, when actually if this was ticked, IntelliSense would have just told me as I was typing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I believe so. I'm trying to think. I'd like to actually try out the scenario and see what might be missing. But yeah, we even have a way to sort of filter for types that aren't currently imported in the IntelliSense list. Like it even has its own filter these days. So it's definitely there, but I'm not there. There could be a number of reasons. It's not triggered, or if it's, I forget what the partially turned on setting is for this, but there's a couple other things. Like we've tried for a while, we had a service that would go and find all of the 1,000 most popular types on NuGet, and it would always suggest like completion for those, as well as actually adding the reference and import statement for you. And a lot of people really, really liked that. But since like we kind of need to keep it up to date, and we this stuff is really tricky because we ended up realizing that some of the types we had indexed were like immediately out of date, especially like the ASP.NET anything JSON serialized. Like there's a bunch of different system.txt. So if we're recommending honestly like it's not the most popular package yet, but it is the most commonly used, but it's still the wrong thing to do for what framework people are using. It got really complicated. So I think we're still trying to kind of stand up that service. I'll have to check on where it was, but we definitely, yeah, that's definitely an area that's interesting that we've dabbled in. I think the most recent coolness we've had is we do add missing usings on paste. So if you copy and paste code from one file to another, it'll automatically grab the usings just when you control V and put it in the new file. I'm really excited about that one. That's the VS 2022 kind of add-on. Oh, and I think we'll do it in Razor actually. Let me just check. Yeah. So we now also we're able to do that in Razor editors as well, which is great because it's all a different kind of using import statement as well.
Oh, nice. And then you've got is it C#10 global using statements as well. So I don't know how I feel about that one, to be honest. It's kind of
it's a mind bender. Yeah.
We'll see.
We got to try.
Well, I'm definitely with you on the, what do you call it? The namespace one. What's it called? File scope?
Yeah, definitely a place. I'll have to talk to Mika and figure out what that partial checkbox is.
That's bugging you now, I can see.
Yeah, now it's going to bug me a lot. Thank you for bugging me. This is what we do all day.
Is there anything more in Visual Studio that's coming in 2022 that we've not already covered?
Oh my gosh, so much. I haven't even talked about half the testing things. Have you heard of Playwright?
I have, yes.
Well, actually, no. Yeah, I did talk about a lot of testing things. We talked about remote testing. We talked about Hot Reload, Show and Test Explorer. Test audio cues is one that I really love. We did release it just before 2017, so you can get it in the later versions of 2019. Test audio cues plays a sound when your test run is completed.
Does it play a different one if it fails?
Yes.
And can you customize it?
Heck yes, we can. I love these questions. This is exactly what we designed for.
So now I'm thinking, if you've got a big speaker in the office, and if if tests fail, it kind of like announces it in front of the entire team.
Yep, you could do that. You could be very, I'm going to say fun and not evil with with this feature. Yeah, it'll accept like any WAV file. It uses the Windows 10 sound dialog, so you already have a lot of default sounds in there that you can just kind of customize, or you could upload absolutely anything, or not upload, but just, to point it to any WAV file in your computer, and it'll play that sound.
Well, my mind defaults to what sounds can we have for a failure, but we should have happy sounds for a success as well, shouldn't we? Really happy sounds in the office.
Exactly. You can have like a little applause. You go. Yeah, it's great.
You can imagine how annoying that would be after a while.
Yeah, it could be. So, so our defaults are like little dings or something, or chimes that are just, built into the Windows 10 sound kind of scape. But it is a really cool feature, because if you're multitasking and you kicked off a test run and you started doing something else, or checking email, or kind of going, in a different direction, it'll kind of bring you back, and it's that subtle kind of cue. It started as an accessibility feature. So, blind developers would need to be having their screen readers like checking output to figure out if the test run completed. And that was just awful. So it's one of those examples of like, yes, adding more accessibility features usually just massively improves things for everyone. And so really excited about that one.
Stuff like that is so important. I think it's easy to take for granted normal usage and forget just how little things like that can really impact people that are maybe partially sighted or have hearing difficulties or whatever it might be. It's just so important to really think about that as part of the UX design.
Mm-hmm. I think someone pointed out just developers with any kind of attention disorder, it's also helpful to bring them back to like any kind of process they kicked off. So they use audio cues for that as well, which is, everybody needs their own configuration and their own things and their own environment. So it's really, really cool to get to be a small part of that.
Yeah, I think these little changes because Visual Studio has so many users, has such a big impact.
Millions, yeah. We actually have thousands of blind developers, I believe. I believe that it was something like 2,000 or something. I was like, what? That's so, I don't know. That's so cool.
That's amazing, that because obviously code is very text-based and blind developers can still develop. That's just fantastic.
Yeah. And, live their whole lives and have their jobs and just do their thing. And yeah, it's really good to be a part of just any place that kind of prioritizes that experience for people. Okay, so one more thing, Playwright.
I knew you were going to say that.
Sorry, I was like I almost dived right into it before we even talked. Yeah. So Playwright is a new testing framework that Microsoft has come up with. It is language agnostic, so it does have like a C# adapter and everything, but JavaScript, Python, Java, it all works for this. This is our new UI testing framework. So if you loved like coded UI recorder in the past or anything like that, this is definitely the very, very much newer version. This is built to be asynchronous, and it is cross-platform, so it works on all operating systems with all modern browsers. And it does have a recorder. That's like the first thing that people ask, like, can I just use the website and it generates a test for you? Yes, you can. So just check out Playwright, spelt like, the writer of a play. And that's kind of the new testing UI framework that we're excited about.
Well, we can definitely include a link to that in the show notes. It's one of these things that's been on my list for a while. It's a long list. You know what it's like. It's kind of such a long list of things you want to play with, but not enough time. Is this kind of like a similar kind of thing that you might have used Selenium for, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I actually didn't know what I was missing a little. So Selenium doesn't do great with asynchronous code. There's actually like sleep and times that you have to build in, sleep threads that you have to build in if you're calling services or anything with some kind of latency that you can't always. So Playwright has all of that basically at the core of its architecture. It's all async await everything. It's all task. So that's very cool with almost like every action. So as you click on things and you generate code, it'll await user actions, like user clicked on this text and or changed this field or selected a drop down or pressed this button or something. It awaits all of those sort of tasks in your test as it generates. So it is as if, a person is going step by step through, and it can replay it. It can replay it headlessly, or you can actually like watch it replay in the browser all of the actions that you took for your web test, which is super cool. Just everything people want. So I don't actually build that one. So I feel like I'm allowed to compliment them because that's a different team than me. That's actually the test framework that I don't own. My team has MS Test and that kind of thing. So I'm like a huge fan of all of them. I'm just waiting for the Playwright release notes when they come out. So it's pretty cool.
I love how excited you're getting with all these different technologies. It's kind of, I'm definitely going to move that higher up my list of things to play with.
Sweet.
Another one, which going back to talking about productivity, and I've still not had a chance to play with it because I'm still on the waiting list, GitHub Copilot.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to play with that yet?
I haven't, because we have a dedicated team for kind of our AI and everything that IntelliCode is working on. So this is kind of another example of people doing the same stuff, because Copilot comes out and IntelliCode is out, and they're both using AI for code completion. Anyway, maybe we'll deduplicate someday, but yeah, it looks absolutely amazing. I can't have a seat because I think I did sign up, but I wasn't able to put that I'm a full-time developer because I talk too much. I just talk about code a lot. So I don't code
There's nothing wrong with that.
I don't code all day, every day, or anything like that. So too bad, but
no, I've been on the waiting list for quite a while, so it'd be good at some point to do a podcast episode on it. But yeah, I need to actually be able to play with it before I can do that. Hint, hint, if anyone's listening.
Definitely. No, I know. I'm like, ooh, could I? If I could put in a good word for you, I would, but I don't know who to talk to.
Fair enough. So before we move on to dev tips, is there anything else you'd like to cover?
I don't think so. Lots of things to check out in Visual Studio 2022. I definitely didn't mention them all in this, so be sure to watch, our Visual Studio launch and .NET Conf and all the cool stuff that'll be showing up on YouTube and on live streams.
Tons and tons of links in the show notes as well, so to all these things. But yeah, next month, can't wait.
Yay! I have so much to do.
Oh, no.
Gotta get that talk done.
So a lot of people getting excited, but you're getting stressed.
No,
No.
I plan so well. Nothing's hectic at all.
You have sounded pretty excited in this episode, so that's quite good.
Yeah, I'm pumped. It'll be cool.
It all looks so cool, all this stuff that's coming out. Can't wait. So, shall we do dev tips?
Sounds good. Who goes first?
Do you want to go first? I don't mind.
I can go first. This is what I discovered just like 2 days ago, and I'm so excited about it. In Visual Studio, on the top right corner is usually a box that will say like preview or just kind of what version of Visual Studio that you're on. If you click on it, it opens help about, so you can see your VS version. So if you're reporting bugs, or if you see a bug and you're like, oh, what version of Visual Studio that I am? This might be a particularly Kendra problem because I have like 7 different versions of Visual Studio on my machine. But I'm always trying to figure out like, oh, am I on the public preview or community or enterprise, or like, and just kind of bouncing around between those as I try out different things. And so having that just one click away is so nice. It's very fast. So I've been using that a lot more to just check what version of Visual Studio I'm in as I'm reporting bugs, or I can make comments about what's working and what's not in later versions. So it's really helpful.
You're saying you've got lots of different versions installed. I found it kind of funny in our email conversation yesterday. And then you mentioned about your dev tip and pointed at your Twitter tweet. And I like joked saying that it was on a version behind or something. And then you said, oh, that's just one of my installations. The other one has this version. And it was like this new shiny version, which there's no way I could get hold of. So I was like,
yep.
You win.
Well, if you're going to rub it in that I didn't freaking update to 4.1 and I was on 4, I'm going to tell you, I have 7 versions installed.
Oh, that did crack me up. It's funny. One thing I noticed today, actually, speaking of that preview button, I opened Visual Studio Preview in administration mode, and that box was split in 2, and it said preview, and next to it said admin. So it really stood out that I was loading it in admin mode. So that was quite nice.
Oh, that's handy. Oh, yeah, for sure.
So my dev tip, I thought I'd try and stay on topic and give a little Visual Studio debugging tip. Quite often, if an unhandled exception, no pun intended, is thrown in your debugger, it will break on that line and tell you about it. But if a handled exception is thrown, like so the exception is thrown within a try-catch block, then the debugger probably won't break on that line you want it to. But what you can do in Visual Studio is press Control, Alt, and E, I think the shortcut is, and that will give you the exceptions pane. And if you check the second checkbox down, there's something called like Common Language Runtime Exceptions, I think it is. Then your debugger will then break on handled exceptions too. And I find this really useful if you're trying to debug an exception to actually get it to stop on the actual line the exception occurs. But then afterwards, you can right-click on the pane and say Restore Defaults, because changing the setting will probably break into the debugger a bit too often for normal debugging, but it's very useful for temporarily setting it if you're having trouble like finding an exception that's handled so it's not actually breaking on that line. So that's my dev tip.
Cool. Love it.
So before we wrap up, where's the best place for listeners to reach out to you if they have any questions?
Yeah, I'm always available on Twitter. My Twitter handle is gotheap, GOTHEAP. Referring to Heap like the free store in computer memory. Anyway, but like a Got Milk commercial. No one remembers this. It's like a commercial from the early 2000s or something. But yeah, so I'm on Twitter, but also you can always file suggestions on Developer Community. That's where we collect all of our bugs and all of our feedback, and I go through hundreds and dozens every week. So it's much easier to follow up if you have a bug that you don't want to report in, 120 characters or less. If you want to include more stuff, please use our report a bug features and provide feedback there.
Awesome. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been so much fun having you on.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, this is a lot of fun.
Awesome. And thank you for everyone for listening. A quick reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Everstack, which is my own company providing software development and consultation services. For more information, visit everstack.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please do help me spread the word. I normally use the hashtag unhandledexception, and I can be found on Twitter @Drakan, and my DMs are open. And my blog, danclark.com, has links to all my social stuff too. And we will include links to all the things we've mentioned, and I've got a feeling it's going to be a long list, in the show notes, which can be found on unhandledexceptionpodcast.com. Tom,